Thank you so much for being with us today. We are so excited to launch the first of 4 Field of Mind events. These are events that, thank you to our sponsor, Farm Credit Canada, for supporting us in this, in all of our community outreach work that we do. The Field of Mind series that we're doing is to really actively take a look at the connection between men and mental health. And so it's designed as a way to really think through some of these issues, some of the thornier issues that come up when men think about mental health. And so when we formulated this idea, we were starting to plan and decide who we'd like to have. And we decided right off the bat that we would like to invite Gerry Friesen to come. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Merle Massey. I am the Executive Director of the Do More Agriculture Foundation here in Canada. We're a national charitable foundation dedicated to cultivating a culture of well-being in Canadian farming communities. One of the things about Do More is that we think about mental health on that broad community level. So what can we do and how can we shine a light on issues across communities that really will help all of us to better understand what mental health looks like, to better accommodate and understand and welcome those that walk with mental health adversity. Maybe they have had a mental health illness or they've got a bit of a challenge going on, something like grief. There are things that we can do at the community level, that it isn't all just falling on an individual level to pull up their own socks and to help their mental health, but there are things that we could think about and talk about at the community level that helps us to understand. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have these 4 Field of Mind events, which led us directly to today. And our guest speaker today is Gerry Friesen. Now, Gerry, he's going to tell you all about himself here in a couple of minutes. I'm going to start throwing some questions at him. But one of the many reasons why we wanted to have Gerry with us today is his book, The Recovering Farmer. So for those of you who haven't had a chance to order this book, I can't stress enough how much I enjoyed this book. It's the subtitle is A Journey Through the Labyrinth of Anxiety and Depression. And the book was launched in 2024, and it's available through all kinds of outlets. It's physically located in all kinds of outlets. You can order it directly from Gerry. He'll even sign it for you and put it in the mail and send it to you. But that's why we wanted to have Gerry talking with us today. And thank you, Gerry, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Massey, for having me.
Well, I'm delighted to have you. So, Gerry, I want to launch right in. Tell us the story of Gerry as a farmer. How did you become a farmer? How did you become involved in so many farm organizations? Tell us about Gerry the farmer.
Well, that's an interesting question, Merle. And I guess I grew up on a farm in southwestern Manitoba on a poultry and grain farm. And really, the thought of farming had never crossed my mind. And yet, I guess having grown up in a Mennonite home, quite frankly, and my dad being a preacher, Merle, you shared a song with me this morning, Be a Farmer or a Preacher, and, and that kind of told the story of my life. But jumping ahead, what happened is my brother and I took over the family farm. We both weren't very keen on grain farming, so we knew we had to diversify to support 2 families, and so we built a hog barn, which quite frankly I had never thought we would do. I grew up across the road from my uncle's place who had a hog farm, and quite honestly, the sounds and smells coming from there did nothing to entice that kind of farming to me. But hey, that's what we did. And so I guess over time, my brother and I were both keenly interested in the happenings in our industries. He was involved in the turkey industry. And so we attended annual meetings, we attended seminars, and kind of got the liking for that, and which eventually led me to be involved in what I call agricultural politics, being involved with Manitoba Pork in the 90s as their chairman, when we actually went through a fairly interesting scenario there when the government of the day decided that they would remove single desk. Till that point, all hogs were being sold through a single desk, and so we dealt with that. We went into an open marketing system, and quite honestly, and if you read my book, you'll understand this, that I never really felt very comfortable in that position, and yet I really enjoyed it. But then what happened is in 2000, the Minister of Agriculture at the time appointed me to the Manitoba Farm Mediation Board, where I seemed to find a niche in my life, and where I understood that perhaps this mediation work, I had some natural abilities to do it. And so I did further my education to agree. Certainly, I'm not anywhere near having a PhD. I don't even have a degree, but hey, I did learn some stuff and actually started my own mediation business. And so maybe that's an indication of how I wasn't really into that farming mode as much as I was into these other areas in life. And so that's, regardless, that's what I did. Our farm, of course, went through some interesting challenges, to say the least, because of people that are involved in agriculture understand the fact that supply management is constantly under scrutiny when there's any type of free trade talks. And so we made the decision to expand in the hog industry. And just anecdotally to tell you, we expanded in 2008. Um, just as we were starting to market hogs out of that expansion, the price had dropped to 19 cents a pound, which was the lowest price in well over 50 years, which meant we had spent $150 to raise a hog, and we were getting between $30 and $35 in the marketplace. And so that's just an indication of how I guess there's a lot of volatility in agriculture, and certainly that was part of it. And it was very difficult to actually recover from that. And eventually in 2007, we did wind down our farm. What had happened, though, previous in 2004, while we were farming, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And I always say that's when my journey of recovery started. Discovery, not so much, that came later. And in fact, in 2007, as the farm was winding down, I came across an ad in the Manitoba Cooperator asking for volunteers for the Manitoba Farm and Rural Stress Line, as it was called at the time. I looked at that as something that I thought could be an extension to a lot of the farm families I was dealing with in farm debt mediation. And so I've all applied, became a volunteer. And then through that, actually in 2010, I started talking publicly about my own journey. And here we are today. It's unbelievable that that's already 15 years ago. A lot of water under the bridge since then. But I always say that my journey of discovery, which I think is a key element for mental illness, is that discovery piece really started when I was with the Farm Line. I had their intensive counseling training, and that really got me on the road to where I'm at today.
That's a brilliant story, and thank you so much for sharing it. One of the pieces of that I find quite fascinating is that you identify that there were external market pressures, and you, because of your work with the Farm Debt Remediation Board, you knew that you weren't the only farm in Manitoba that was also experiencing a lot of these pressures, and how it was coming out in people. And yet, one of the things that I find interesting is that oftentimes when a farmer finds themselves in that financial predicament, and agree with this or not, but so many take that as a personal failure. Talk to me
Absolutely,
about that.
absolutely, Merle. And and it was interesting. In fact, I did a webinar last week with a group in Saskatchewan. I actually see that Karen is on here. And one of the participants asked me whether it had been a blessing or a curse with my mental illness or my journey. And I found that question very interesting, and then had an email exchange with them later. And basically it was like, it's been a blessing because you're helping other people, right? Well, which in my darkest moments is a little difficult to accept, but I get that. And it was very interesting, and just an experience that I share in the book is sitting around the kitchen table with a farm couple, and he pulled out a letter that he had received from his credit union, who were beginning legal action to realize on security. And he read it to me. His voice broke as he was reading it. And when he finished, I said, "You know what I did when I got that letter from my credit union?" And his mouth just dropped, and he said, "You know what I'm talking about?" Yes. So yes, because of my own journey, I've been able to build that connection with other people. And you're absolutely right, Merle, because it feels like a personal, not an insult, but it feels very personal when you're facing financial difficulties and you're going, well, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? And yet, with the way the volatility of the markets are, with stuff that's going on today, with tariff, the threat of tariffs. I mean, anything you look at, there's a list of things. Is those are outside of our control, and if we can only accept that, it's much easier to accept the position we find ourselves in.
And remembering that it isn't necessarily a personal favor, that there's all these things happening in the larger system, and it just, maybe it just hit your farm at a moment when it was in a transition point or in a pivot period, or in a time of maybe increased vulnerability because you just expanded, or you just bought something new, a new tractor, a new seed drill, whatever it is. And so sometimes timing is part of it, and people still tend to forget, and that personalization of the story. And the reason why I bring up this personalization, Gerry, is that I'm thinking about that connection between men and mental health, specifically farmers. What was it like to be a farmer, to be a male farmer, and come to that realization that you had a mental illness that needed to be understood?
You know, that's $1 million question, Merle. And sometimes when I look back, I wonder if I didn't really sense the impact of it. You know, I went to a doctor in 2004. He prescribed medication. I grabbed the medication, went home, made no other lifestyle changes, made no changes in my work. I was busy. I was involved in so many different things, but it was only later that I started to realize exactly what this meant. But when I look back, I also understand that, hey, I grew up in a culture, and many of us my age do, and even some younger ones grew up in a culture where if you were having issues, and certainly would never be defined as a mental illness, it would just be that you're facing challenges, and so that meant you weren't working hard enough, or your faith wasn't strong enough, or you weren't praying enough. And so that in fact is what I try to do, is to work my way out of it, which I now looking back, I almost have to chuckle because I realize what an absolutely hopeless road I was on, because you can't work your way out of this. You have to recognize it. And that's why I say the discovery part is so important,
So
because
you
men are
you
men are tough, right? And we shouldn't talk about feelings, and we just need to work harder. We're the providers, and well, and yeah, we're the providers. That certainly isn't the case anymore as much as it certainly was a number of years ago. But that's a mentality that we have. And is it because we're socialized that way? Probably.
did you feel at the time any kind of sense that you were breaking new ground, or did you feel a sense of that you didn't want people to know that you had, approached a doctor to get help? Tell us about how you felt.
Oh, you certainly don't want people to know about it, because again, in my view, it was a weakness. So you certainly don't want people to know about it. So you want to quietly deal with it, uh, and move on. And of course, there's that stigma, right? And so it's only, and I can't remember which conversation this was part of. Merle might have been with you, where I started telling my story in 2010. I was, I always say, manipulated into telling my story publicly, and and I recalled so many times when I would do that, people were very hesitant to, certainly in public, they wouldn't get up and ask a question. So much of that has changed, and there's so much more willingness to be engaged in the conversation, and it's heartwarming for me to see that. And at the same time, there's still so much work that needs to be done.
What were you hearing at the community level? Like how the community that you were in, the farming community that you were in, can you describe it for me at that time, when you, in 2004, when you reached out to the doctor? What do you think the sense was in your community around understanding and support for mental illness and mental health?
You know what? I'm not sure, because again, people didn't know. I didn't want them to know. And I would suspect it would still have been, you know what, Friesen, pull up your pants, get to work, and things will work themselves out.
It's absolutely a common understanding. I agree. It's part of that culture. What do you see as the difference between men and mental health and women in mental health? Do you see any differences?
Yes, and I tread very carefully when I say this because it sounds harsh, but I think there's one sentence that basically sums it up, and that is women talk about it and men kill themselves. Um, that's a difference. I've sensed that in talking to folks. I mean, there's been a lot more women that have approached me and asked for help for their husbands than there have been husbands that have approached me to ask for help. And I think that's an indication, and I need to tread so carefully here. I hate using blanket statements, so I'm not using a blanket statement, but I think so often women are much more aware, are much more sensitive to what's going on with their partners than the other way around.
It's an interesting perspective, and I appreciate you raising that in terms of that reaching out for help bit, and you're just talking about your experience, those that have come to you. And I want to say this: one of the things that I love most about your book, The Recovering Farmer, is that it is not a book that tells other people what to do. Your book talks about what you did and what you learned and your journey and the pieces that you learned along the way and your aha moments along the way, and you take us with us on that journey. Can you talk to us about where the book came from? I understand that you started writing long before the book came out.
I did. Again, I'm easily manipulated, Merle. And so in 2010, and it's the same person that did this, and trust me, I've given her a rough time a few times about this, is she also suggested to me one day that I should write a blog. Um, and so I did. I started that project in 2010. I've said quite often that my brain has the ability to come up with about 600 words. If my train of thought doesn't leave the station without me, I can do the 600 words. I did that and I enjoyed it. And in fact, for me, it was a type of journaling. We often talk about how important journaling is when you're on a journey with mental illness or, stress. It's important to journal. To me, it was journaling. I did this, wrote one once a week. There was times when I had thought about, well, I could compile these into a book. Um, then I would read some of them that I had written in the past, and they really didn't seem like it was worth publishing them. And then someone heard some farm stories I told about some experiences on the farm, and they said, well, I should write a book. And well, okay, I could write a book about some of the experiences I had, but it wouldn't be a very long book. And so through all of that, I guess I did start writing a book and eventually got to the point and my grandson was here on the weekend and he asked me when I had started writing my book. And we came to the conclusion it was probably 2019 or 2020, perhaps. And then I put it aside because I had gone down rabbit holes that weren't any good for me or anybody else. And then, in fact, when the Manitoba Farmer Wellness Program started, there was a lot of media interest in it, and a reporter from the Brandon Sun interviewed me. And of course, every time I do an interview, some of my personal story starts coming out as well. And so she sent me a text the following day and said, you know what, you need to write a book. And so I guess that was the jolt I needed to get on with it again. And so I did, and ended up with a book. And I still sometimes am mystified that it actually happened. But it did happen.
I want to go back. You made a comment when I asked about men and women and the different ways that they think about or take action for mental health. And you made the comment that men kill themselves. And we're only going to stay in this for just a moment, but it is part of that larger conversation. And the stats bear it out, right? That women are 3 times more likely to make an attempt to take their life, to die by suicide, but men are more than twice as likely to die by suicide, to be successful. These stats are difficult, yet they matter, and they matter more so in a rural community than in an urban community. We've got access to lethality in rural communities at a different level. What have you seen about how people talk about suicide? You're a little bit older than me, and I know that in my lifetime, there's been some changes. What have you seen?
Oh, that's an interesting question, Merle. Um, I have to think back. And again, I think when I look back, and yes, there was a boy that was 2 or 3 years older than me that took his own life when I was 10 years old, I believe. At the time, it wasn't something that was talked about in our home. I'll put it that way. And certainly in our home and in a fundamental Mennonite home, certainly I think suicide would have been viewed as an unpardonable sin. And I talk about that in the book, and I'm not going to get into the details there because that's a very, very sensitive subject. But what has struck me over the years is, yes, of course, as I grow older, I know people, I hear about people, of course, being involved in the farmer wellness program, I hear more about people that take their own life. But what has really, really hit me hard is one of my kids in high school lost a friend. He was at our house one evening, and the next day he took his own life. And then my other son, this was after high school, took his life. And my daughter's best friend's brother, like it starts hitting closer and closer to home. Um, and yet, do we talk about it more? I'm not sure we do. Uh, and it's a very, very difficult subject to talk about. And when I reflect on that, Merle, I can't help but thinking about my own situation. Um, did I ever seriously think I would take my own life? No. But did I think about it in my darkest times? Absolutely. And not just 20 years ago, a year ago, a month ago. You sometimes when you're in these dark moments, I heard a story yesterday about a gentleman that had suddenly passed away, and I felt a wee bit of envy for that because it's like, he's done the battle, he's done fighting, and this wasn't a suicide, it was by natural causes. And so those thoughts are there, and I think it's incredibly important that we do talk about it.
One of the most moving passages in your book is that you describe a funeral that you attended where the person who died by suicide, and the family described it in such a heartwarming way. Can you share with the audience how that family described it?
Yes, they did. And it was well, I'll talk about the impact the funeral had on me in a bit here, but I did go to the funeral. It was absolutely shocking. It was a friend of mine's wife. I'd never realized that she had struggled again, not public knowledge. And at the funeral, the family got up and they talked about how much they had learned in the 5 or 6 days leading up to or since her death about mental illness. And they made it very, very clear that if their mother had died of cancer, they would be standing up there and talking about what a valiant fight, courageous fight. But at the end of the day, she had lost. And that's what they wanted the people there to know, is that their mother had fought a courageous fight with mental illness and had lost. And so, it happened. And I talked to some family members about this. I told them after, I said, you know what, I left that funeral feeling encouraged, which is bizarre, I know. And they said, hey, they felt the same way. And that is number one, to understand that myself, along with many others, uh, are fighting a fight, and we're fighting a courageous fight. And so again, you're not alone. There's others out there, and yes, they're all struggling. And so it's a great team to be on if that's your lot in life. Um, but the other thing that was really frightening for me as I left there was hoping that, thinking that some morning I might wake up and just not be able to face another day. So, yeah, as much as I was encouraged, it's still somewhat frightening.
It absolutely is, and that actually segues very well to a point that I want you to elaborate on. You in 2008, like in 2005, you guys started to make the decision to close down the farm, and in 2007, that was all finished. Did you think that would be the end of your mental health journey? Let's flip it another way. Could you have really been on a good journey of recovery had you still been farming? What's the intersection between farming and your recovery journey? And so the question really is, were you all better after you stopped farming?
No, I'm not all better today, Merle. Um, that's the short answer. In 2004, my doctor referred me to a psychiatrist, and I met with the psychiatrist, he asked about, of course, the genetic history, and yes, there is some in my family, and we talked about different things, and I talked a lot about how the stressors of farming just got to me, and I made the comment to him that I think if I was able to sell my farm, I'd be better. And he looked me in the eye and he said, "No, you won't be." And it's not that that made me feel hopeless, but it's certainly, looking back now, I understand why he said that. And so again, it's important when we talk about depression in particular. Is it a situational thing? Is it a genetic thing? Is it something else? And to, again, when I talk about the discovery piece of my journey, right? Learning about all the ins and outs of mental illness to be able to go, yeah, okay, this is who I am. And the other thing that I really, really like to tell people, Merle, is, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be a mental illness, but if you're facing overwhelming stress, and you go through a long period of this, and I'm not talking a day or two or a week or two, I'm talking months or even a year or two, that when you come out of that, yes, you can go into recovery mode, but there's a good chance that your tolerance levels for stress aren't going to be the same as they used to be. Um, and I think it's important for people to understand that, because, and I've talked to those that say, but it doesn't make sense. And in my case, when we were dealing with these financial issues, I was dealing with bankers and creditors and talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that created significant anxiety for me. I now, when my wife comes up to me and says, "Oh, we have this 500, oh no, you can't fix a car for $500 anymore. But for $1,000 or $1,500 we have to spend on our vehicle," I start feeling that same kind of anxiety. So I have to recognize the fact that my tolerance level has come way down, and be aware of that, and live accordingly.
And that's fascinating. So it's still it sort of takes what the doctor had to say, like, no, you're not going to solve it if you stop farming, because you're not going to solve the depression and the anxiety. But you obviously realize that helping to remove some of that stress level, or manage it in a different way, was part of the piece, and that recognizing the outcome is that, yeah, you've got lower tolerance levels now for some of these things, that stress looks different to you because of this long history of your high levels of stress. I love the word that you use, your discovery phase. Tell us what that means.
Can best be described this way, Merle, and I say it's my discovery piece started in 2007 when I got the counseling training for the farm line and lots of conversations with the people that work there. But really, to draw the best picture of that, I go back to 2018. And since then, I've had, I don't know, countless appointments with various professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, community mental health workers, counselors, therapists, what have you. And in 2018, I was going off the rails again, and my family said to me, "You need to get help." And I said, "But who do I go see? I've seen them all." And my wife suggested I go see a naturopath. And I don't want everybody on here now to hang up and or log out and go make an appointment with a naturopath. I'm not saying that that's the answer for everybody. Again, Merle, like you said before, this is my story, right? And so it was a naturopath. I phoned, made the appointment, and they said, well, they had one there that had expertise in mental illness. And I said, yeah, absolutely. I went there, chatted with her for an hour and a half. And just by the way, when I came home from that appointment, my wife said, that's the first time you've ever come home from an appointment with a smile on your face. That doctor connected dots for me. And for me, with my mental illness, is all about the biggest thing is, and I've had discussions with other people about this, the biggest piece is to understand, why am I the way I am? And that's what she did that day. And she connected dots from when I was a teenager all the way through. Uh, we haven't talked about this, but certainly in the 90s, when I was dealing with a lot of stuff, I always say that, yes, I was diagnosed in 2004, but a lot of this started before that. And I used alcohol to cope. Alcohol does a great job of removing anxiety. Absolutely marvelous. And you can all go try if you want. But at the end of the day, the problem is within half an hour to an hour, I can't remember the exact number, alcohol starts leaving your body. And in fact, the anxiety increases exponentially. And so the only way to combat that is to drink more, which I did, which only led to bigger issues. Um, which I forgot what the question was. Where am I
Discovery.
going, Merle? What's
Discovery.
that? Oh,
Discovery.
yes. So the discovery piece. So she was able to, and of course, for those that are into this, there's the serotonin piece, which is always the first thing. Antidepressants address the serotonin levels. The naturopaths, and quite frankly, and I could tell you a long story about what happened this last winter. Um, but the naturopath says, I don't think you have a serotonin problem. I think you have a dopamine problem. And so we address that, and it's made huge changes in my life. And so I'm always curious, and in fact, I'll be very brief about this. This last winter happens every fall. I start sliding down that hill again. And for those that don't know, I'm an avid golfer, and when I start seeing the golf season come to an end, oh, anyway, I decided that I was going to try antidepressants again. Hadn't had them for 17 years, I think, and found out that they don't work for me because I have a certain something in my DNA, and only 8% of the population has this. Antidepressants just make symptoms worse for me. And so that's a discovery piece. So, yeah, it was the worst 3 weeks of my life, almost. And yet I feel happy I experienced that because I've learned more, right?
It goes back to the question that you had last week when you were chatting with the Canadian Centre for Rural and Agricultural Health around are you better off now or not? Like, going through this and sharing your story, has that been a good piece? Again, that goes to that discovery piece. Thank you for sharing that with us. There's something that you mentioned that I want to dive into. So you talked a little bit about alcohol. Your book is called The Recovering Farmer. And this was what you called your blog as well. I grew up in an AA and Al-Anon family. So my father had bipolar disorder, which was not a term that we had in the 1970s. We didn't know what was going on, but we did know about the alcoholism And Dad did join AA. And, my mother had her Al-Anon book in her purse everywhere she went, and would read it in every quiet moment. So I grew up in that. So my understanding of what it meant is that Dad always referred to himself as he was a recovering alcoholic, and that he was permanently in recovery. Tell us about the title, The Recovering Farmer. What does that mean to you?
Well, and that's an interesting story. And I started referring to myself that way, I suspect, shortly after I started with the Manitoba Farm and Rural Stress Line in 2007. Never actually took the time to think about or research what that actually meant. And I would suspect it was because I had heard the term recovering alcoholics. I sometimes call myself a recovering Mennonite. But the recovering farmer piece, and then in fact I was doing a radio interview, and my sister happened to hear it, and so she called me right after, and she says, "What does it mean, the recovering farmer?" And I said, "I actually have no idea." But then I went home and looked it up, and really to recover means to return to a previous state of health, prosperity, and equanimity. Well, hey, that just made perfect sense to me. And so with my health, my mental health in particular, it's an ongoing journey. And so I haven't recovered yet, and never will. Prosper prosperity, I keep to saying that I blew my retirement in the 90s. So my wife tells me I have to work till noon the day of my funeral. Uh, which is fine. But I am wealthy in many other ways, right? I have kids and grandkids that help me on my journey. I couldn't be happier with them. The equanimity piece, now, sorry, I have to laugh because equanimity, there's no way I'm ever going to recover from that one, Merle, trust me. And all my stress in life manifests itself in road rage. Um, and so I'm a very, very impatient driver. And in fact, my wife will often tell me when she's with me, she says, "I can't even believe you're a mediator," because of the way I am. But hey, it's a work in progress, right?
We're all a work in progress. I think that that's brilliant. And someday I'd love to meet your wife. I love the backstory on the recovering farmer, and coming out of the blogs, this phrase, the recovering farmer, and how it really resonated with you. You weren't quite sure why. You told your sister not quite sure, but this resonated with you, and you developed those blogs, and then rolled it up together, and developed this book, which came out, and it's had so much growth and impact. What feedback are you hearing from people about how the book is impacting them?
It's interesting. I often think about this, that people people will take bits and pieces. Yeah, there will be those that say, "Awesome book, I loved it from cover to cover," but a lot of them will take pieces out of there. And I'll be honest with you, Merle, and I may have told you this before, when I wrote the chapter on being a Mennonite, I'm very careful, and I say this in the foreword. I'm very, very careful that I don't blame the church, I don't blame my parents, I don't blame my school for any part of who I am today. But I'm also open about the fact that all of that contributed to where I'm at today, and that's fine. Um, but I also know and was very cognizant of, when I was writing this, that there's pieces in there, whether it's the Mennonite church, whether it's the alcohol piece, whether it's the suicide piece. Some of the stuff I write about and I'm very open about, I know will step on the toes of other people. And so I feel encouraged when I get notes from people that have read it, and they say, "You know what, that piece on Mennonites really hit home for me," and then share some of their own stories, or that piece on suicide. Merle, that article you wrote for that publication was amazing, because there was an acknowledgement that it had been written and that it was impactful. But I guess what the best story is there's a gentleman that golfs at my golf course here. I don't golf with him, but he's here early in the mornings. And he heard an interview I had done on the radio. So he sent me an email and he says, I'm not a farmer. Um, and he's 70 years old probably. But he says, I have a brother that deals with mental health issues, and I've never understood them. I don't understand my brother or his issues. And he said, I'd like to read your book. And so he read my book, and then he sent me an email and he said, I now get it. And I just went, good. That's awesome. If that's what that book can do for someone, that's perfect.
That is a very strong recommendation, because what he did is that he reached out to you and said, I'm curious. I need to learn more. I have a gap in my own knowledge. I don't understand what's happening with my brother. And he saw your book as a path to get there, but he was still activating his own curiosity the same way that you activated your curiosity about your own journey. What do I need? What is this illness? What do I need to do to address this illness? What are the things that can help me? I love that activating that curiosity.
Well, and Merle, the world we both work in, we often talk about, yes, there's people that experience that overwhelming stress. There's people that experience mental illness in farming. Uh, but I also, and happened to me on more than one occasion after a presentation, someone will come to me and say, well, yep, thank goodness I don't have to deal with that. And that's perfect. I am so happy for people that don't have to deal with that. But I always tell them, good for you, but understand the fact that you have family, neighbors, someone around you who is dealing with this. So reach out and support and help that person.
I love that, because that's and it speaks to the statistic that we know, which is that 1/4 of Canadians will experience some adversity to their mental health across the course of their lifetime, and that's just those who are diagnosed. So the belief is that the number is likely higher than that, because there are people who self-manage, whether it's through drugs and alcohol, through whatever it is that they use to try and self-manage, or they stumble on some of these other self-management and self-support tools, such as journaling, such as eating well and exercise and various other things that work for them. And it is absolutely a high statistic. It's way higher than say some of the cancer rates, or some heart condition rates, right? Like, it's way higher, and yet we have such a public understanding of some of these physical things, and we're still working to grow public understanding of the role of mental health. Where does your hope sit, Gerry? What do you see happening now that gives you hope for the future?
That gives me hope for the future. Well, my golf course opened this last weekend, and for the next 6 months, I'll be okay. Um, you know what, Merle? I love the fact, and I said this often before, in 2010, and I remember it was at Ag Days in Brandon. Um, the Manitoba Farm and Rural Stress Line was kicking off some workshops, particularly about men in depression. And so I had been asked to tell my story, so I did this at Ag Days. And yes, it felt good to have the occasional person come up to me and say, hey, I appreciated hearing that. I am experiencing whatever, comparing stories. I'm a staunch proponent of that. Talking about it is so incredibly important, and people are starting to do that more and more. And so, you know what? 10 years ago, if someone asked me to do a presentation, they would say, well, we want you to talk for 40 minutes and we'll have 15 minutes for questions and answers. And I always laughed and said, it ain't going to happen. People won't ask questions in public about it. But that's changed, Merle. It does happen. And it's so refreshing to see that, and to have these organizations. And you and I were involved in a meeting this morning, and we're going to be involved in another meeting tomorrow, where there's people from across Canada that are all working in this area, and it's so absolutely heartwarming to see that being addressed. And one of the questions I was asked in an interview shortly after, a year after the Manitoba Farmer Wellness Program started, a reporter said, "So back when you were dealing with this, when you were farming, would a program like this have been helpful for you?" And unequivocally, yes. And we hear the stories, anecdotal stories about, sorry, I'm digressing here. I'm going off down a pathway here. We hear stories about farmers going to see doctors, right? And the story about the guy that went to see his doctor in August because he was experiencing something, and the doctor wanted to write him a sick note for 2 weeks, right? Well, sure, that ain't gonna happen. Um, I tell the story about a psychologist. This was in 2005. I had gone off my medication, thought I was good. That happens, right? And there was a fairly significant event in my life which pushed me over the edge again, as it were. And so my wife and I decided, well, instead of going back on medication, which we hadn't been convinced had been helpful, um, we should try talk therapy. And let's start with a psychologist. Well, just made an appointment, went to see the psychologist, poured my soul out like you're supposed to do. And he looked at me and he says, "You can't afford me. You better go back on medication." And the only reason is because I had told him we had financial issues on the farm, and he couldn't believe that we would even think about selling a family farm. Like, just no concept. And so when we have these programs, it's heartwarming. Sorry, I'm getting passionate here.
I love it when you get passionate, because then, even more stories pop out, which I know that everybody who's here listening today and those that are going to listen to this, after we post it on our YouTube site, they're going to hear what you have to say and know that it comes from your heart, Gerry. And that's,
Can I
yes,
can I tell another story?
please. I always love your stories.
I said before, talking about it helps, right? I talked before about those people that aren't necessarily struggling, and so they should support a neighbor or a friend or a family member. Back in 2005, like I talked about, when this event happened in my life, 3 days after that, what happened is my brother was involved in an accident, and so now all the work was pushed on my shoulders on the farm, and he was laying in the hospital in a coma. And so my neighbor showed up 3 days after this happened, and he asked me, "How are you doing?" And you know how we normally respond, "Well, I'm doing okay. Yep, fine, plugging along, another day in paradise, whatever, you know." And for some strange reason that day, I started talking and I verbalized everything that was going on up here. And you know what? He sat for an hour. He didn't give me any answers. He normalized and validated what I was feeling. But the very fact that he did what he did was the encouragement I needed. That was one small step. And what that encouraged me to do was take another step. And so that's how impactful it is. And just that note about talking about it, people sometimes look at me strange, but I always say that people that deal with issues like I do ruminate a lot. And there's all this stuff going around in your head. And I've found out that 70% of what's going on up here is all a lie anyway. It's not true. And so when you verbalize what's in your head, you number one is you start realizing yourself how much BS was going on up here, right? Wasn't even true. So why are you even thinking about it? But secondly, as soon as you do that, it eases a huge burden off your shoulders because now you verbalize it, it's out there, and you feel better, you feel lighter.
That neighbor who came to see you, he created a space for you to talk. But the way that you tell that story, it tells me that he wasn't there to tell you what to do. He wasn't there saying, "Did you try this? Did you try that? Did you do?" He wasn't solving the problem for you. What he was doing was offering you active listening.
Safe. I was in a safe place, active listening. And that's all I needed that day. And you often hear people say that, right? Just come sit with me. And even if there isn't a word said, come sit with me. And it's such a support.
It's a huge support. And so and I love it. And thank you for that story, because what it does is that it really validates. People will often ask, do more. Well, what do I do? How do I help? Right. And they want to leap right ahead to the solving part. And it's like, no, just listening, active listening, shining a light, creating space for that conversation. That is a powerful piece of help that you can offer.
I just saw some, sorry, I was a little distracted. Someone just put in the chat, ruminate isn't just for bovine.
I saw it too. I was just about to say it. I was like, oh, that's a great one.
Yeah.
And there have been a couple of comments. And if you would like to put a question for Gerry in the comments, please feel free to do so. Mike Skripnik, when we were talking about the statistics around men, he said the harm stats are overwhelmingly, disproportionately male, up to 30 to 40% more prominent in rural over urban populations. And that's not just in Canada, that's globally. So absolutely. There's a guy that just put in, I've been struggling for the past month, thanks Bryce, trying to find the words that will make up my letter of intent for my application into Brandon's psychiatric nursing program. Hearing your attitude, your outlook, your experiences has my creative juices flowing. Thank you, Gerry. Oh, that's so
Good luck,
great.
Bryce.
Yes, best of luck with that. And yes, we all ruminate. I do agree. If there are more questions that you would like to add in, please do so. And Gerry, I interviewed you last summer when your book first came out, when I was working at the Canadian Centre for Rural and Agricultural Health. And at the end of our interview, and I said, okay, what are the 3 things that you want people to remember? Or if they read your book, what are the top 3 things that you want people to remember?
You
What
did
would they?
ask me that.
I
I
did.
forgot.
It doesn't matter.
No, I
What would you
didn't.
say today? They can be completely different.
No, trust me, Merle, you made me come up with those 3 points last year, and I've used them ever since. Number 1 is you're not alone. Number 2 is it's more than okay to reach out for help. And number 3 is there's hope and there's relief.
That is the best way to capture everything in your book, to let people know that they're not alone, that it is absolutely okay and good to reach out for help. And there is hope and there is relief. And you are a walking testament to that hope and relief. For those of you that haven't had a chance to order Gerry's book, I'll put a link online. I'll just find that for you. And Gerry, if you have one more thing, oh, there's another message coming in there. It might be something in the chat. I'll just pull it up. Thanks, Gerry. I was true. Oh, I couldn't tear myself away. Thank you, Doug. Thank you for coming. Fellow farmer and social worker counselor trying to support be available for community members. Any advice? Oh, Alyssa, that is a great question. There absolutely is. So one of the things that researchers have discovered is that exactly the story that Gerry mentioned, that you can go to a counselor, you can get over that internal stigma and get yourself to a counselor or to a therapist. And then if the therapist tells you take 2 weeks off and you've got a barn full of milk cows, that's not very useful. So one of the things that is happening across Canada is that there are a number of entities, including the Do More Agriculture Foundation, that help therapists to better understand farming so that they can create a closer therapeutic relationship. So Do More Ag hosts a series of 10 workshops. They're called Ag Culture, and they are free. They're also supported by Farm Credit Canada, and they're part of our community fund. And those, you can go to our website, you can sign up online if you're a therapist or professional in agriculture, and you can sign up for an ag culture workshop. They are taught by Bonnie Taylor, who is a farmer herself out of Ontario, also a therapist. And Bonnie has a master's in social work, and so she can help you to develop that closer relationship. And so, Michaela, thank you. for putting the link to Do More Egg events. So all the upcoming egg culture workshops are there. So thank you very much for putting that in, Michaela. And actually, Michaela, if you can also put a link in to Gerry's book, just find Gerry Friesen online and put the link in. That would be great. Alyssa, I also want to mention that Do More is not the only group that does training for therapy. So the Canadian Centre for Agricultural Wellbeing also hosts their, what they call, I think it's CALP. It's Canadian Ag Literacy Program. And so it's also training. There's a third entity here in Canada that does excellent work. If you're looking for that higher level of accreditation, if you're an existing therapist, I recommend that you reach out to the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance. And it's Lorraine Van Uwick out of Ontario. And she is a therapist herself. And she's developed an online accredited program. It's about 12 hours, so it's a little bit more intense than what we offer at Do More, but it's an excellent program, and I do recommend it. So those are the three that I can put to you. And Kristen also put in Ontario, there's also the Guardian Network. It's a peer-to-peer network coordinated by Agricultural Wellness Ontario. Thank you, Michaela, for putting the link in. And Aaron said, thank you for this session. Sorry, it keeps popping around. Your story hits so close to home. Growing up on a family farm in the hog industry, I can relate more than you will ever know. My dad is about your age, and we recently had a candid conversation about this topic. First one ever. That's fantastic. And Doreen also mentioned that one of these things that we have at the Do More Agriculture Foundation is something called Ag Talk. So if you feel that you don't have anyone, a real live person in your family or in your community that you feel comfortable chatting with, we also have Ag Talk, which is an online, anonymous peer community. So anybody who's struggling with their mental health and comes from an agricultural background, you are welcome to go and join Ag Talk online. And one of the things that Ag Talk sits within what's called the Together All platform, and Together All has been working to develop more peer training. So rural peers, and to help them to feel more comfortable to open these conversations. Another group that's doing excellent work around rural peer training is the Stigma Free Mental Health Society. And I know that Mike Skripnik is here today. And so Mike, if you want to pop in the link to your rural peer training, please feel free to do so. It is an excellent program. So if you live in a rural community and you would like to know more about how to help other people around you, that's an excellent training program as well. So we've given you all kinds of additional, thank you, Susan Bell, for putting in the CALP program as well. There is help out there. People are having these conversations. They're much more interested in helping. And Gerry, I want to give you the final word. How do you feel? How do you feel now about mental health as opposed to when you were, say, 20?
How do I feel now? I feel very fortunate. Um, Number one, that I have the understanding I do. I feel very fortunate for the people that have supported me, for my wife, my kids. And yeah, I am so happy that it's being talked about. And you just mentioned a pile of resources. I'm not sure that you mentioned Sask Ag Matters.
No, or Manitoba Farmer Wellness or Ag No,
And
which is it. And these are absolutely amazing programs.
and
We could
they're
go on and
yeah,
on.
and my point being they're in every province or in
Yes.
most provinces, which is just absolutely fantastic. And so any help, any support we can be for all these programs, good, because it is a good play. And the testimonials I hear from Manitoba from clients we've had in the program is it's helpful, and it just reiterates the fact that there's hope and there's relief.
There absolutely is hope and there's relief. So just to drill down, so some of these programs that we just mentioned, Gerry's program, Manitoba Farmer Wellness, Sask Ag Matters in Saskatchewan, Ag No in Alberta, and there are other programs. Ag Safe BC has a program, and there are programs in almost every province. The reason why they're at the provincial level is that they connect farmers with therapists. And of course, therapists have to be accredited at the provincial level. Health is a provincial responsibility in Canada. And so we need to have those provincial level entities in place. What they do is that they find funding. So if a farmer is experiencing, if that's their barrier to getting help, to getting therapeutic help and visiting a therapist, these groups have been collecting funds from wonderful, generous supporters to make sure that financial barrier is eased and they can connect farmers with therapists who understand agriculture and remove the financial barriers to bring them together. And the programs differ in terms of how many hours are covered. It's anywhere from 4 to 10, just depending on what province you're in. But they're fantastic programs. And I invite you to take a look at the Do More Ag website. We have links to all of those programs across Canada.
And I think it's important to note, Merle, certainly in Manitoba, and I believe in Saskatchewan as well, I'm not going to talk for other provinces, but that the counselors have a background knowledge of agriculture.
100%.
Which is key.
It is absolutely key. And we also have, of course, our national call line that just got introduced here in Canada, as well as most of the provinces. So most provinces have long had a provincial farm stress line. Gerry, you talked about your connection to the provincial farm stress line in Manitoba and the training that you had. I know Saskatchewan actually was the first farm stress line, was created back in the 1990s. So there's been a lot of work done in this area. And we know that when a farmer actually overcomes their internal barriers to call a call line, if the person on the other end understands farming, their connection is a lot closer, a lot sooner, and they can get to where they need to go that much faster. So it's really, really important that we have these in place. Gerry, thank you so much for meeting with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Thank you, all of you, for coming and joining in. And thank you for all the notes and resources that and we will make sure that we, as we post this on our YouTube site, that all of our links to all of these amazing resources are also included. And final note, if you haven't already bought Gerry's book, go buy Gerry's book. It's fantastic, and share it with all your friends. When I became the new executive director of the Do More Agriculture Foundation, I bought 9 copies of the book and sent it to each of the board members for Do More Ag, because it's that good. Thank you, Gerry.
You very much. Thank you very much for having me, Merle. I really appreciate it. I always enjoy chatting with you. And as you can tell, I'm passionate about this. Like I said last week, I'll say it again. Anybody that's participated today or in the future when they see this, would love to hear from you. Send me an email. All of my contact information is on my website, so I'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gerry.